This program is a presentation of UCTV for educational and non-commercial use only.
It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to all of you. It's lunchtime and I have a bag of groceries. And unusual for an oncologist to really talk about nutrition. What I'd like to talk about today is nutrition and cancer from the perspective of the potential for what we eat to reduce our risk of cancer. I think most of us are probably quite aware that smoking contributes 30% of so-called avoidable malignancies. What's less clear to most is that what we eat and what we don't eat is probably responsible for an equal amount of malignant disease. So nutrition is really important. How did I become involved in nutrition and cancer? Well, I am chief of oncology at San Francisco General Hospital. I've been an oncologist now for 28 years. And I must say that, I wasn't always interested in the nutritional aspects. I've been partnered with a macrobiotic chef for 15 years. And that certainly changed a lot of my perspective about food. And then I took the fellowship in integrative medicine from Andrew Weil's program at the University of Arizona in 2002 for 2 years. It was an online distance learning fellowship where for the first time as a physician I really learned about nutrition. Unfortunately in medical school they don't teach us that much. I don't know medical school nowadays, but certainly when I went, we did not learn nutrition. And I think that's really important, especially if we're going to have healthcare reform. Not to get on a political soapbox here, but I don't see obesity in this room. And I just went to Japan. I chase solar eclipses, and I was just in Japan for a few days after the last eclipse, and there's really such amazing paucity of obesity that it strikes you that nobody in Japan is obese. Unfortunately, they have all of these U.S. chain fast food places that are opening up now, and I fear that their slenderness as a population is going to be diminishing in the future. But I think that, obesity is a major problem, and it is a risk for the development of a number of cancers. And keeping your body mass index lean is very important. I've handed out something that I will be alluding to during the course of this presentation. This is the American Institute of Cancer Research, the World Cancer Research Fund. Every 10 years puts out new guidelines for cancer risk reduction. And they're very simple, and there are only 10 of them, and they're in the bottom shaded box here. And you can see, per what I was talking about, that being overweight does tend to increase the risk of a number of diseases, particularly those that are related to hormone. So breast, uterine, ovarian, and prostate in men. Probably because obese fat makes hormones, and many of these cancers are fueled by hormones. And also, we don't detoxify hormones that are produced well when we have too much body weight. So again, the number one guideline for cancer, and prevention is a funny word. One of my dear friends is Robert Bazell, who's the NBC News science correspondent, and he said, Donald, if in your practice of integrative oncology you do anything, please get away from the idea of cancer prevention, because we really can't prevent it. And then when people get it, they feel guilty that they did something wrong. So let's say risk reduction. And so I think these are really guidelines for cancer risk reduction. Number one, be as lean as possible without becoming underweight. Number two, be physically active for at least 30 minutes every day. How many people do that? It's very difficult. There was a study in 2001, Newsweek did, on healthy aging, and they listed healthy activities, and more people felt it was more difficult to include a half an hour of physical activity into their daytime than people felt it was difficult to quit smoking cigarettes. So it is felt to be something that for the adult population is difficult to make time for, but it's very important. And a number of different malignancies are decreased, the risk is decreased if people are physically active. And we know in women with breast cancer, for example, 30 minutes of vigorous walking a day. In women and men with colon cancer, 60 minutes of physical activity daily is very, very potent at decreasing the risk of both recurrence and also increasing survival. So the first two guidelines from the American Institute of Cancer Research have not a lot to do directly about food. And I find it interesting that the third guideline, which is the first one that mentions anything that we put in our mouth, is a new guideline. And it wasn't there in 1997. These were the guidelines released in 2007. And if you look, it says, avoid sugary drinks. Now, many of you know that the American Heart Association just last week got a big splash of publicity by coming out against soft drinks and sodas and saying that we drink too much in the United States. The amount of consumption of sugary drinks and the fact that sugary drinks contain not only sugar, but now these sugars made out of corn. Because we overgrow corn, we don't know what to do with it anymore, and so we make products that we really shouldn't be eating, like high fructose corn syrup, dextrin, maltodextrin, all these other nicknames for corn or sugar made out of corn. So actually in 2007, because that was a new guideline and because it spoke to me, because I don't do refined sugar at all, I went to the microphone in Washington in front of 2,500 people and I said, there are sugary drinks and there are sugary drinks. You can drink a cola, God forbid, or a fruit punch, which probably has both glucose and high fructose corn syrup, or you can squeeze 3 oranges every day. And the response from the podium, surprising to me, was energetically, they're all the same. So I know everybody's, so what does that mean? So I think that the next line here, limit consumption of energy-dense foods, particularly processed foods high in added sugar or low in fiber or high in fat. So when I eat an orange, there's fiber and there's sugar. The natural sugar in the orange is fine. That's good for you. When I take the orange and I remove the juice from the fiber, my body is expecting to get fiber with that load of sugar. Similarly, if I put 3 teaspoons of sugar in my green tea, my body would say, uh-oh, a lot of fiber coming. Squirts out insulin and insulin-like growth factor to handle that sugar and the fiber. There is no fiber. So what happens to our blood sugar? It goes way down because that's too much insulin and insulin-like growth factor. Our mood and our energy go way down. And to come back up again, we have to eat more sugar. So people are on this constant sort of roller coaster of mood and energy. What's worse, insulin and insulin-like growth factor promote inflammation. And much of the diet that I'm going to be talking to you about is basically organic, plant-based, antioxidant-rich, and anti-inflammatory. Inflammation, if you get a cut or you have surgery, when the wound heals, there's heat, tenderness, swelling, and pain. That's inflammation. That's part of the body's normal healing process. If inflammation is going on inside your body unprovoked by surgery, for example, that's bad. And we think that inflammation leads to many of the degenerative diseases of aging, dementia, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. So insulin and insulin-like growth factor, we're now aware, causes inflammation, but what's worse, it causes cancer cells to divide. So any food that has this so-called high glycemic index that becomes sugar very rapidly when it goes into the bloodstream is really not good. And that's why they said avoid sugary drinks as their #1 guideline for cancer risk reduction, and avoid energy-rich foods, which are highly processed foods. Now, going into my shopping bag for a second, I'm doing this a little spontaneously. So when we talk about sugar, I tell my patients to avoid refined sugar or anything that is a nickname for sugar. So when I talk about that, you know that there are these nutrition facts boxes on any processed food you buy. And that gives you the total fat, total carbohydrates, protein. This is a bar that a patient gave to me to demonstrate that she only eats healthy food. This says Go Lean. I'm not promoting or demoting any brands here. And we looked at the nutrition facts box. It is okay to have sugar in the nutrition facts box. That sugar fuels our brain. We don't want sugar in the ingredients list. Okay, so this actually has 13 grams of sugar. This bar, smaller, doesn't say anything about Go Lean, has 16 grams of sugar, which seems a little odd because it's smaller. But let me read you the ingredients of this bar. Dates, pecans, and almonds. 3 ingredients. Longest word is 2 syllables, and most of us know what they all are, right? Here's the healthy bar. About 30 ingredients. I'm just going to read you the first 4. Brown rice syrup. What is that? Soy protein isolate. Who knows what that is? That's the other thing we overproduce that we don't know what to do with it, so we make a protein isolate. Ingredient number 2. Ingredient number 3, evaporated cane juice crystals. Ingredient number 4, crystalline fructose. 3 out of the first 4 ingredients are sugar, and the second one, we don't know what it is. And finally, we get to number 5, oat fiber. Yahoo! Healthy. So we do need to learn how to read that sort of stuff if you're going to buy processed foods. My inclination is to eat low on the processed foods list and buy things like this that have ingredients that we recognize and that are not overly adulterated. We know that diabetics also do poorly with cancer compared to people who don't have diabetes, and it's felt that this has to do, again, with that glucose load and insulin-like growth factor. Actually, they're now looking at blocking insulin-like growth factor as a potential treatment for breast cancer because it's felt that this is so important in that realm. Now, I said that my dietary advice, let me just say, when I see a patient for an integrative oncology consultation, I'm not treating their cancer here. I treat cancer at San Francisco General. Here, I treat the person living with cancer. And I say, cancer is a weed, and you are the garden. And my job is to make your soil as inhospitable as possible to growth and spread of the weed. And so what do I look at first is the fertilizer in your garden. So again, my advice is for people living with cancer and for people trying to reduce the risk of cancer that your diet should be organic as much as possible and plant-based. Now, last week or last month, there was a huge stir because the British did a meta-analysis of clinical trials and showed that organic food is no more healthy, they said, than food that is conventionally produced. Does not make sense. They looked at macronutrients in the food. They didn't look at so-called phytonutrients, the special chemicals that plants make. They looked more like at carbohydrates and sugars and those sort of larger things. And you know, these are always difficult questions to tease out because we're not going to give this half of the room an entirely organic diet for the next 50 years and see who gets cancer and this half conventional. You know, you can't do these studies. But they also didn't take into account the pesticides, the fertilizers. These are all chemicals that have not been in human beings except for the last, what, 50, 20, 10? I mean, they're always inventing new things. So the other thing is a plant grown outdoors organically compared to one that's grown indoors and coddled and sprayed needs to protect itself from its environment, from other plants, from birds, insects, and other predators, and from the sunshine. And how does a plant protect itself? It doesn't, you know, can't fight, so it produces chemicals. And those chemicals that the plant produces, for the most part, are the ones that are beneficial to us, those phytonutrients, plant nutrients. And an organically grown, outdoor, unsprayed plant is a better medicine. Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. If you want potent food, it should be organic. And some things particularly should really always be organic because of the way they're produced when they're conventional. So number 4 says, eat more of a variety of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes, such as beans. And I also then would refer you to Andy Weil's anti-inflammatory food pyramid. Andrew wrote a book called Healthy Aging, which has a whole chapter on the anti-inflammatory diet. And this sort of is a good summary of that chapter, which is in somewhat different from the normal food diet that's put out by the American Dietary Association. But when we say eat more of a variety of vegetables, the first thing that I like to tell people is, first of all, we need 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, and you can never eat enough cruciferous vegetables, no matter what George Bush or whoever it was that didn't like broccoli says. These vegetables are very potent in reducing the risk of numerous types of cancer. They have very potent compounds, and they actually need to be crushed and chewed to let the reaction occur that releases the most potent anti-cancer agents. Now, these things, most of the fruits and vegetables that we'll talk about, they're either anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, or they promote detoxification of toxins that we come in touch with, or they may actually have activity against cancer cells' life cycle and the way cancer cells divide. So cruciferous vegetables, and these include vegetables whose flowers grow in the shape of a cross. Broccoli, that's why it's crucifix. Broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale. There's a great website if you just Google cruciferous vegetables. It has wonderful recipes, and it tells you arugula and all these other things that we didn't know are cruciferous are there. Now, these contain glucosinolates, and they become isothiocyanates and indols. I'm not going to bore you with it, but they're the major classes, and they're all based on sulfur, right? So cabbage is another cruciferous vegetable. So these are very healthy. The sprouts of broccoli actually contain 100 to 1,000 times more potency than broccoli itself. People always say, is it okay to cook? Because there's a big raw movement now. And the fear is that cooking destroys the plant's enzyme. And I always said, well, it's our enzymes that are important for digestion, not the plants. But in fact, with broccoli and maybe garlic, some of the others, it does require that enzyme, and heating does decrease the activity, but it doesn't destroy it. So we don't want to make broccoli the way my mother used to, so that it becomes gray-brown. You know, you want to blanch it, you want to steam it, you want to quickly stir-fry it. So you don't want it to die. And many of us eat broccoli anyway as crudité, raw. There was a study, broccoli again reduces the risk of many malignancies. There was a study that showed for bladder cancer, raw broccoli seemed to reduce the risk more than people who only ate cooked broccoli. So I think mixing and matching your cruciferous vegetables, whether they're raw or cooked, is a good thing to do. So I have for breakfast sometimes broccoli, tofu, brown rice, and mayonnaise, which is a soy-based mayonnaise. Before I get to tofu, though, or soy, another cruciferous vegetable, which is really, many people don't, who knows what this is? Yeah, so it's kale, but many people, I talked to never heard of kale, and it's cruciferous. So it has the indole 3-carbinol, which is very potent, but it's also green leafy. So foliage has folate. Folate is also very important anti-cancer. Particularly, what we've done now, we find these things are good, and so we enrich our foods with them. So folic acid is now put in many processed foods, particularly flours and baked goods, and that was to reduce the risk of birth defects, particularly neural tube defects, and also because it was felt maybe to promote cardiovascular disease. Well, it's been shown that it hasn't done much for cardiovascular disease. It has probably done quite a bit to decrease neural tube defects, which I think are rare in the first place. But we think that colon cancer has not decreased despite colonoscopy because that added folic acid in those processed grain products is allowing people who have polyps to have their polyps grow more than we'd like them to and potentially develop a risk of a malignant change. So that's been attributed to why colon cancer has not decreased. It is perfectly safe and fine to get your folate from green leafy vegetables, foliage. Collard greens are also good because they are also cruciferous. All of those large, now people always say, well, spinach, gee, isn't that the healthiest food? It's Popeye's. You know, spinach is okay, but it does also complex with calcium, which is very important chemical for reducing cancer risk. So there are many other vegetables that are more potent than spinach as far as reducing your risk of cancer. So kale is really, and collards are very good source of folate. Women who drink alcohol are at less of a risk to develop breast cancer if they have good folate levels. I mentioned breast cancer and women, and soy always is a big question. Soybeans and soy products are hugely consumed in Asia, or have been in the traditional Asian diet, much less so in the United States. And we know that Asian women and Asian men have significantly less risk of breast and prostate cancer than people eating a Western diet. And as Asian women and men migrate to Hawaii, their risk gets closer to non-Asians in the United States. And once they're eating a mainland diet, they have the same risk as those of us that don't eat a lot of soy. Asians tend to eat 50 to 100 grams of soy a day. Many people don't even know what soy is. There was a report coming from Hawaii that eating tofu twice a week increased the risk of dementia. And so I was banned from eating further tofu. And I said, well, wait a minute. You know, my father and his wife are both demented. I don't think neither of them have ever even, couldn't even spell it. So I think that was true and unrelated, and there may have been other variables there with regards to that. But I'll tell you, like corn, which I mentioned, we overproduce and we don't know what to do with it. We're doing the same with soy. So now we have soy protein isolate, which we don't know what it is. So eating heavily processed soy is not good. But edamame, soybeans, tofu, soy milk, and tempeh are about as far as I would go. Soy cheese, soy protein powders, soy turkeys, soy hot dogs, no. In fact, in Israel, they actually banned these soy products because they're concerned about effects on hormones in growing kids that are consuming soy out of proportion to what maybe they should. Again, soy is a plant estrogen, a phytoestrogen. So the reason we think it protects against breast cancer, as you know, the risk of breast cancer is increased the longer the breast is exposed to human estrogen. And so the plant estrogen in the developing adolescent girl who eats a lot of soy is protected because the plant estrogen blocks a little bit the body's own estrogen. And in men, we often use we treat prostate cancer. We used to treat it with an estrogen in the old days. So a plant estrogen may be a good thing to do. So, I think eating soy products is important for all of us, although I think the potential benefit was probably greatest while we were adolescents. And chances are, if we're not Asian, we didn't eat a lot of soy products as adolescents. So talking about men and prostates and vegetables or fruits, I never can figure out if it is a vegetable or a fruit. The tomato, and I have a little bit of a rotten tomato, so I have it in a plastic bag, and I think I'll put it right back. But the tomato is really important because it's one of the few sources of lycopene, which is a potent chemical that we think is really useful in prostate cancer. They've done studies of men who have had prostate cancer diagnosed by a needle biopsy, and then they feed them a lycopene-rich diet for a month before they take out their prostates. and they measure their prostate-specific antigen, or PSA, over that month, and then they look at the tumor under the microscope compared to the biopsy specimen, and they show that if they're fed a lycopene-rich diet, the tumor becomes less aggressive and the PSA actually goes down. You cannot benefit from the lycopene in eating a raw tomato. The Italians had it right. The tomato has to be cooked in oil to remove the active ingredient. So olive oil is particularly a good oil because it's not rich in omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-6 fatty acids have become dominant in our diet. They cause inflammation. Omega-3 fatty acids are the ones that we want to increase in our diet. Olive oil is mainly omega-9, which is neutral. So cooking tomatoes in olive oil, good for men, good for their prostates. I'm not sure that we know what it's doing for women. If there's a benefit, I don't think there's a harm. Other sources of lycopene, interestingly, are watermelon and pink grapefruit. Now, I shy away from telling people to eat a lot of pink grapefruit because pink grapefruit modifies the liver enzyme system that detoxifies many of our drugs. And people who eat pink grapefruit and are taking prescription drugs often get toxicity from the prescription drugs because pink grapefruit blocks the normal breakdown of those drugs. So do be careful with if you eat too much pink grapefruit. And one other thing that's very common right now, or very popular in the prostate cancer world, is pomegranate juice. Now, what would be the problem there? Again, it's a juice. And so I see many patients who come to me and say, oh, I have cancer, I'm juicing everything now. I say, maybe not a good idea. Pomegranates, because they are a heavily pigmented fruit, are really, really good. But I think, again, taking the juice away from the fiber might not be the best thing to do. Just looking to see what other vegetables I have. So in addition to cruciferous and green leafy, orange yellow vegetables are rich in carotenoids, beta-carotene, carrots, squash, and in the next month or two we'll get sweet potatoes back in season again too. Very good orange yellow vegetables, very good source of this pre-vitamin A. Now, you'll see down here one of the recommendations is don't use supplements to protect against cancer. And I'm not going to have time to go into all that literature today, but they felt that beta-carotene and vitamin A might protect men who smoked against getting lung cancer. So they did a huge study in Finland of 30,000 cigarette-smoking Finnish men, and they randomly assigned them to get beta-carotene, which is a vitamin A precursor from these yellow-type vegetables, as a supplement, or vitamin E. And they looked at their risk of lung cancer after 5 years, and actually the men getting the beta-carotene supplement had more lung cancer, which was a surprise, but it was reproduced in 3 other studies, huge studies of smokers, that beta-carotene actually increases the risk of lung cancer. Beta-carotene or vitamin A is in every multiple vitamin that people buy. And I'm very sort of not so eager to have my patients, especially those who have been smokers, take a multiple vitamin because I think it gives you things that you don't need. It was also in that study, if I can digress, that they found in men who were randomly assigned the vitamin E, they seem to have a lower rate of prostate cancer. So they just did another huge study of men over 55, 30,000 randomly assigned to get vitamin E, selenium, both or neither. And that study, to protect against prostate cancer, was stopped because, in fact, in the vitamin E group, they actually saw a slight increased risk of prostate cancer. Whereas the other studies, so how could that possibly be? Well, vitamin E in nature exists in 8 different forms: alpha, beta, gamma, and delta tocopherol, alpha, beta, gamma, and delta tocotrienol. When you take a supplement, it's usually D-alpha only, and you get like 40 times the body's required dietary allowance. So when that D-alpha tocopherol level gets like this, you're not going to absorb the gamma tocopherol from your walnuts. And in fact, it might be gamma tocopherol that prevents or reduces the risk of cancer. So again, I personally stopped taking my vitamin E supplement because there's just no good evidence that it does anything that's so good. And I was taking one that had all 8 different forms of vitamin E. If I want vitamin E now, I take a little teaspoon of wheat germ oil because that gives you 8 different forms. Spices with good anti-cancer activity from the same allium family, onions and garlic. And again, garlic is a real miracle drug. It has antifungal activity, lowers blood pressure, lowers cholesterol. Best if it is chewed or crushed. It's another one of those where the plant does have enzymes and the activity is increased if it's chewed or crushed. I actually have an acquaintance who's one of these people that produces these capsules, you know, this garlic or cruciferous vegetables. And after doing some reading, I said, well, when you make these, does your processing count as doing the crushing that's necessary to release the activity and to make these potent foods? And there wasn't a real clear answer to that question. So again, I'm a big proponent of eating the whole food. You know, taking a garlic supplement, maybe I do that because the other thing garlic does is, Andrew Weil says that the first sign of a cold, he eats 2 raw cloves of garlic. I tried that once and yikes, that really burnt my tongue. So I can't do that, but sometimes I do take those garlic pills in the winter if I feel like I'm getting a cold. So garlic and onions, again, in the same family. The other good thing is ginger. And then, what's that? Turmeric. So turmeric is, I think, the spice of the millennium or whatever. People have found that in India, with its huge population, they have a very, very low rate of dementia and a much lower rate of cancer than one would expect. Turmeric now turmeric is used in curry, but it mainly imparts the yellow color. The other things, cumin and coriander and fenugreek, however you say that, I think are what impart the flavor of curry. Turmeric has many activities against cancer cells in their life cycle and seems to be a very potent anti-cancer drug. The American Society of Clinical Oncology, which is the sort of conventional cancer doctor meeting, 3 years ago when I went, devoted a whole morning session to turmeric as an anti-cancer agent. And they talked about these mice that they developed so that they're programmed to develop colon cancer. And they fed those mice a turmeric-enriched diet. And not only did the mice not develop colon cancer, but they survived longer than the control animals. So numerous studies are suggesting that turmeric is very good for people with gastrointestinal tract malignancies, anywhere from, you know, I think from the esophagus down to the bottom. And there's also some evidence that in pancreatic cancer or biliary tract cancers, and now they're doing some work in breast cancer. So how much turmeric do we need? I just read someplace yesterday, if you use a teaspoon a day, sprinkle it in a stir fry on some vegetables, in a soup, whatever, that might be good. Adding black pepper to turmeric increases the absorption of the active ingredients 1,000-fold. So in many of the patients I see here, I still don't know if a teaspoon of turmeric a day is going to be enough. For patients who have colon cancer that's spread to their liver, for example, I might say, against my policy of eat the whole food, I might say take a turmeric capsule. Because in fact, a turmeric capsule is the whole food if you're just taking turmeric. Now, the active ingredient is really curcumin, and there are capsules that are curcumin, some that come with piperine, which is black pepper. But, you know, again, for various situations, I might recommend that people supplement with a turmeric capsule because it is very healthy. Now, one of my favorite things, and really the reason I got started in this whole career, was when I went to the Telluride Mushroom Festival. That's where I heard Andrew Weil discuss his fellowship in integrative medicine, and that's after my 2 years doing that, I sort of changed my whole career. So mushrooms are my friend. We live in a mycophobic society, the United States. We're all afraid that mushrooms are poison or they're going to cause us to grow hair on our palms or whatever. Mushrooms are healthy. They're not plants. They're not animals. They're their own kingdom, the fungi. And probably we're more closely related, or mushrooms are more closely related to animals than plants, in fact. And this is a shiitake, or a black mushroom. All mushrooms need to be cooked. White button mushrooms, commonly sliced and thrown in salads, contain hydrazine, which is a cancer-causing chemical used in rocket fuels. Their cousins, the brown crimini, and their giant cousins, the portobellos, also need to be cooked. All mushrooms need to be cooked. I have a friend and his wife who are renowned mycologists who don't eat white button mushrooms even if they are cooked because they're not convinced that those toxins have been killed. But on the other hand, the white button mushroom industry is trying to say that mushrooms, white button mushrooms, agaricus is that family, contains aromatase inhibitor activity. And in fact, a huge study in China said that women who consume fresh mushrooms and dried mushrooms, and the fresh were mainly white button and the dried were mainly shiitake, had a decreased risk of breast cancer. And if they consumed the mushrooms and drank green tea, that risk was further decreased. Now, how does a mushroom have anything to do with cancer? Mushrooms have a lot of activities. Again, antioxidant. I mentioned antioxidant a lot in my grocery basket, and I haven't really described what that is. But you know, oxygen usually lives in two molecules together. And when they separate and you have a free radical, if you will, of oxygen, it's unstable and it can damage tissues and particularly DNA of tissues. So we tend to try to eat a lot of antioxidant-rich foods because those antioxidants scavenge those free radicals of oxygen and complex with them so they don't damage our tissues. So mushrooms have a bit of antioxidant activity. They also have more immune-enhancing activity. As you know, the body can fight cancer itself. Most of us are getting little malignant clones of cells every day that the body is removing because we have a good immune system. And it's felt that mushrooms, by actually behaving a little bit as if there's a microbe invader into our body, stimulate our immune system as a microbe might to be generally upregulated. And then there's also some evidence that various mushrooms, some of them not edible, may have direct anti-cancer chemicals in them. One of the big ones that people hear about a lot is reishi. That's Ganoderma lucidum. It's called reishi in Japan, and it's called lingzhi in China, where it's also felt to be the mushroom of immortality. And that's not an edible mushroom. It's one of those that grows on tree trunks, and it's very firm, but you can make teas out of it, or you can take it as a tincture. And many, many of my patients, particularly Asian patients, are using mushrooms in collaboration or coincident with their anti-cancer treatments. And, you know, it's something I think that warrants further study. So we're still, I guess I'm still into my plants. For fruits, heavily pigmented fruits, and right now we're in the berry season, are really potent antioxidants, to the point where some of my colleagues across the street, when they're giving patients radiation therapy, advise them not to eat blueberries. Now, when it comes right down to it, which is more potent, this blueberry or that beam of radiation that's killing cancer tissue? I think probably eating antioxidant-rich diet when you're getting radiation or chemotherapy is okay. I don't recommend that if the goal is cure, that patients take high doses of supplemental antioxidants while they're getting their treatments. So the heavily pigmented fruits, all the berries, red grapes as opposed to green grapes, and you know, that grapes that have skin and seeds, and it's that little bitterness, I think, that is the important compound in these agents. But again, when they're out of season, if you don't want to have a big carbon footprint and import them from the southern hemisphere, frozen berries don't lose as much of their potency as, for example, frozen cruciferous vegetables. They only lose about 10% of their potency. So you can do frozen berries. And again, most berries, particularly, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, with all their surface area and those grooves and clefts and seeds, should really be organic because they act as sponges for toxins if they're not. Now, I'd have to say I cannot find frozen organic blueberries that are not dried up and shriveled and tasteless. So in the winter, I do eat frozen conventional blueberries, I confess. Although everybody tells me there's one of those places out there where you can find frozen organic blueberries that are quite good. But while we're in the berry season, I would take advantage of them. Ellagic acid is felt to be one of the major components. There are some investigators at Ohio State that are doing studies on black raspberries, which I don't think, they must exist in nature, but you don't see them at Whole Foods anyway. And black raspberries apparently can protect against malignancies of the whole digestive tract, from the mouth all the way again down to the bottom. So, again, what science tries to do when we find out these things do that is isolate the active component and make it into a drug. But if nature gave it to us, why don't we just use it as it's given? Because I think it's usually the best packaging. Apples, quercetin, something in apples, very good. I eat everything except the stem. I know people say, well, no, you can't eat the seeds, they're poison. Well, they do have a little cyanide. I'm not big on homeopathy in general, but in homeopathy, you take a little bit every day of what you're trying to avoid. And what does cyanide cause? Death. So you take a little death every day. Apparently, the Queen Mum did just what I did. She ate an apple a day, the entire apple. And how old did she get to be? Yeah, 103. So, did we do eat more of a variety of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes such as berries? So whole grains, brown rice is better than white rice. But if you love white rice, jasmine and basmati are better than Uncle Ben's or regular sushi rice because, again, it's that glycemic index. They don't become sugar as quickly as the other ones do. Millet and quinoa are also excellent grains that people need to learn how to cook with. They're really, really delicious and very nutritious. Our next guideline, number 5, says limit consumption of red meats, such as beef, pork, and lamb, and avoid processed meats. So not even limit consumption, but avoid processed meats. I mean, I went to an event in LA the other day, and for lunch they served bread and processed meats. And I, didn't know exactly what to do. I ate a lot of the mustard because mustard is turmeric, of course. But I didn't want to look too obvious, so I ate tomatoes and mustard and took some of that turkey, because I figured that's the least of all evils. But it is a processed meat. And the thing is, those chemicals, again, Michael Pollan, who's great and has written The Botany of Desire and Omnivore's Dilemma and In Defense of Food, says don't eat anything that your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize. And most of these processed meats were not around when great-grandmother was around. So, so I try not to do that. So beef, the curve of beef consumption and colon cancer for various countries goes just like that. So the countries that don't eat beef have colon cancer like this, and this is in women. The countries where women eat a lot of beef, New Zealand is the top, are right there. And beef has also been implicated not only in colorectal cancer, but also in pancreatic cancer in women. And one of the problems with beef is that we feed it corn because we've overgrown corn. And beef are not meant to eat corn. Beef are really meant to eat grass. And when beef eat grass, the fat that they make is rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. When we feed beef corn, the fat that they make is rich in omega-6 fatty acids, which is pro-inflammatory. Plus, so that they can digest the corn, we have to give the beef enzymes, and then that part of their stomach that usually digests grass that isn't gets infected, so they get a lot of antibiotics. So that's what beef is. And where does dairy come from? Mainly cows. So although it's not on their list, and it's one of the questions that I've asked them, why don't you have any cautions about dairy products? Because I think animal fats in general and anything coming from a cow is probably not meant for human consumption. Actually, Barbara Kingsolver in her book, Animal Vegetable Miracle, does a nice job explaining dairy. There is no other species that drinks another species' milk. And no other species drinks milk after they've been weaned. We talk about lactose intolerance as if it's a disease or a disorder, when in fact it is the norm. And the ability to digest dairy is a genetic mutation on the second chromosome, present mainly in Scandinavians who needed to digest reindeer milk in times of freeze. Southern Europeans, Asians, Africans, Mexicans, Jews just don't have that gene. So most of us are lactose intolerant. And I think dairy and dairy products become a stimulus to our immune system, create mucus, and is really just as bad as beef. And I wouldn't be surprised if the guidelines in 2017, when they come out with their next, maybe say something about dairy. I mean, it's already felt that dairy may have something to do with breast cancer and prostate cancer. Again, these hormonally related cancers, because these cows are often given hormones. Now, they might not be estrogens, but bovine growth hormone is something that cows are given to make them constantly be making milk, and also to grow big so they make big beef. And when we get bovine growth hormone, it doesn't become growth hormone in us, thank goodness, because that does promote cancer cells, but it becomes insulin-like growth factor, or promotes insulin-like growth factor, which does promote cancer. So red meat, no. I, every once in a while, eat a little lamb because it's cleaner, it's not fed like cows and pigs, and just to get a little bit of iron or something. But I live on salmon. Deep, cold water fish, right? Salmon, particular sockeye salmon, but Andrew Weil didn't want to say that out loud because he didn't want to be responsible for the extinction of a species, and he could do that. Yeah. Albacore tuna, black cod, very good alternative. And then the rest are the smaller fish, if you're concerned about mercury, herring, mackerel, and sardines, but those are really fishy. But I do try to eat salmon at least 3 times a week. I don't worry personally about mercury because I'm not pregnant or breastfeeding or a developing child. If you really want to be scared about foods that you eat, read Marion Nessel's book, What to Eat. And she takes us through the supermarket and really makes it like you wonder what you should eat. She has 4 chapters on fish, which got me very disturbed. But, we have to eat something. So Andy Weil, in his book on the anti-inflammatory diet, cautions people about poultry and eggs because he thinks chicken and eggs are rich in arachidonic acid, which is the chemical precursor to prostaglandins, which are the liquid mediators of inflammation. I think, again, this is because of what those animals are fed, and if we do organic poultry, it's okay. Since I ask my patients to eliminate dairy, sugar, and red meat, I feel like poultry is, I can give in. And I think that, you see a lot of eggs now fortified with omega-3 fatty acids. Again, salmon is a great source of omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3, anti-inflammatory and also antidepressant. And so for my cancer patients, not only do I recommend deep cold water fish, but I do recommend an omega-3 fatty acid supplement because people are not going to eat their fish every day rich in omega-3s. So if consumed at all, number 6, limit alcoholic drinks to 2 for men and 1 for women a day. So your alcoholic beverage of choice should be red wine. Again, more resveratrol, which is a potent, probably anti-aging and life-extending chemical than you find in white wine. And again, this seemingly sexist recommendation has to do with the way women metabolize alcohol and how fat metabolizes alcohol, and detoxification doesn't happen as well as women as in men. Women at risk for breast cancer, really the guideline is only 1 alcoholic drink a week. So again, in women, clearly the graph for the number of alcoholic drinks you have and your risk of postmenopausal estrogen receptor positive breast cancer is a straight line like that. So from less than 1 drink to 3 drinks a day, the line goes up like that, from 7% risk to 50%. So pretty impressive. Alcohol also causes many cancers of the upper aerodigestive tract, head and neck, esophagus. However, one of my colleagues, the one who served me the processed meats at the meeting in Los Angeles, has done a study looking at a huge number of men in the Kaiser system who are smokers, and find that red wine in smokers decreases their risk of lung cancer. I actually wanted to do a study of that, sort of, looking at red wine capsules. I know that's sort of against what I've said, that I don't like. I like the whole food, but it's sort of hard to distribute red wine in a clinical trial, versus resveratrol capsules, to see if it was just this resveratrol or if it was something else in smokers. But then I have a junior colleague who has a deeper social conscience, I guess, than I do, and he said, well, Donald, what's going to be your public health message from this study, that it's okay for people to smoke as long as they drink a lot of wine? No, that doesn't make sense. So,
Very well done.
yeah, so what do we drink? We should drink green tea. Tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world after water, and green tea particularly is rich in a polyphenol, a catechin called ECGC. I won't try to say what it all stands for, but this is another very potent cancer risk-reducing chemical, similar to what we have in our cruciferous vegetables, to the point where scientists are looking at making it a chemotherapy agent because it does so well in preventing various types of cancers. Green tea, the studies that show how much green tea you need are done in Asia, where the teacup, as you know, is much smaller. So they say you need an enormous amount of green tea, but I drink 4 cups this size every morning. Now, green tea does have a little caffeine, but not as much. A cup of coffee has about 150 milligrams. Black tea has 80, cola has 50, and green tea has less than 10. So it's not a lot of caffeine. But again, there was recently an article that green tea may interfere with one of the drugs we use to treat multiple myeloma. Actually went and looked at that article, and it was very elegant. But the amount of green tea that you would need to drink to get to the level that they used in this experiment in the test tube was impossible to achieve that blood level. So even though the press was splashed with don't let multiple myeloma patients on this drug drink green tea, it's probably an overstatement. And I think it extended even, they said don't let lymphoma or leukemia patients who aren't even treated with that drug. I encourage everybody to drink green tea. Again, white tea is also very potent in this ECGC. Oolong and black teas are not, because they're too heavily fermented and oxidized, so they don't have this compound. A question that always comes up with my patients, I don't want caffeine, what about decaffeinated green tea? My fear is that decaffeination might remove some of the possible healthful elements. I don't know that for a fact. So I say if you can tolerate that little tiny bit of caffeine, go for it. So, I think that there are many foods that we can eat and have a healthy diet. And I just want to share with you some books that I think are really, really great. The first is Foods to Fight Cancer. This is $11 on Amazon. Again, I'm not trying to promote anything, but this is such a beautiful book. Goes over much of everything I said and spoke about today, except I left out chocolate. Because, you know, chocolate usually has sugar and dairy with it, but I know that the rich or the dark chocolate doesn't have to. But chocolate is a good thing, but I left it out in the interest of time. The cookbook that Richard Beliveau did to accompany Foods That Fight Cancer is called Cooking with Foods That Fight Cancer. One of my patients said, you only need this one because it has most of the stuff in here. Rebecca Katz, who lives in Marin County and is a dear friend, is coming out with a new book called The Cancer Fighting Kitchen. Her old book is One Bite at a Time. Her new book, The Cancer Fighting Kitchen, is going to be out next week, and it's really beautiful. I sort of helped her, and I gave her some of my comments that I thought there was maybe a little too much dairy in this one, et cetera, et cetera. So I really look forward to that book being out. And then two other cookbooks that are not cancer specific, although this woman, Christina Perello, Cooking the Whole Foods Way, apparently cured herself of cancer through diet, but I don't know if I necessarily believe that 100%. And then the Super Antioxidant Diet, it's a cookbook, but it's also a little bit of a way of life. So I like that as well. And, you know, again, I think that we are what we eat. When I grew up, there was that woman, Adele Davis, who said that. Actually, somebody said it in France a century before she did, but she translated it. And, you know, I think it's important for us as a society to be conscious of what we eat. And when we talk about healthcare reform, the problem that we have now is that we have a disease management system and not a healthcare system. And teaching wellness, to me, begins with knowing what to eat and what not to eat. And I hope that in this hour, I've given you a little bit of enlightenment in that direction. Thank you all very much for your attention.